Okay.
So we're doing something 7th grade.
Yeah, and ninth grade. There's 2 7th, 1 8th, and 1 9th that are all doing this weird 1.5 fusion of kids who are on their first, second, or third year of Latin. And it's going swell. All right, anyway, here's the beginning of this video. And I need to make this go away.
So why did you teach us in 5th grade if you're only supposed to do 7th?
What do you mean?
On our very first year, you taught 6th grade.
And yeah, so some sixth graders or no, all people who are here that year are going to get 4 years of Latin. It's just there's different flavors of years of
So
Latin.
would all the other 6th graders?
Huh?
Would all the other 6th graders get Latin?
We're not teaching sixth grade this year, but y'all can skip this part of the video. I'm getting off track, but yeah, we're just taking a year off. I don't know what your question is. Okay, daily Roman life. Let's talk about some daily Roman life stuff, like their religious views. We'll talk about that initially because that's such a big cornerstone of what it meant to be a Roman 2,000 years ago, give or take. We'll talk about birth, marriage, and funeral practices. We'll talk about some of their daily, like day-to-day activity, which includes visits to bathhouses or going to the Roman Forum, and some of their favorite entertainment, which includes Roman comedy and gladiatorial combat, which is something that kind of comes about a little later, actually. If we're talking about like the Roman Republic and the Roman Empire, it's more of something that starts at the beginning of the Empire period. So Roman religion was all about giving so that gods may give back, right? Do ut des means I give so that you might give. You meaning the Roman gods. So, and by giving, I mostly mean the sacrifices that they would carry out during various festivals that would happen throughout the year. Their calendar was filled to the brim with religious festivals where you would travel to a certain temple on a certain day and partake in a festive ceremonial sacrifice of a bull or a pig or whatever kind of animal, usually farm animals that were like done up all nice and looking kind of like fancy. They were led to up the steps of a temple and then sacrificed. The bones and the blood and the fat were the parts that were given to the gods, and then the humans would actually partake in eating the meat. So it wasn't an entirely superstitious waste. But this is a big cornerstone of Roman religion. It goes back to practices that the ancient Greeks had hundreds of years before Rome was even really a thing. And it's something that was done, this version of animal sacrifice, it was done all over the Mediterranean for hundreds of years, if not centuries. Or, yeah, that's what a century is, it's 100 years. Preceding the Roman Republic, or what we think of as ancient Rome. Okay, so in addition to citywide gods, or even like Roman Empire-wide gods that were celebrated or worshipped all throughout the Roman territory, every family had their own household gods. These were called lares or penates. So you'd walk into a Roman household, and in the front room, the atrium, they would have their household gods, which were unique to them. Sounds kind of cool. It'd be like if nowadays, if every family had like a mascot that it was like, this is our family's mascot, and it was like there's an artifact of it, and they'd pass it on to the family. I guess in a way, some families do have, whether it's jewelry or certain, not relics, that wouldn't be the word for it, but certain things that get handed down through the years. In a way, that's almost similar, but they usually don't have this religious significance that these household gods would have had. And they're important for certain things like marriage and when children are born and other festivals that all of Rome would be celebrating. Jaden?
So this would be like house rules that a house god creates.
That they wouldn't really correspond with rules necessarily. They were supposed to be gods that protected specifically that family and that household, and so they would be related to gods like Vesta, who is this household goddess. She's one of Jupiter's sisters that's like never really talked about, but they would be unique and specific. So every family would have their own little household god that would be, individual to them. Debbie? That's a good question. I should look into that. I assume maybe that the gods are passed down through to the male heirs. And so the woman kind of marries into another family, and she might not necessarily take her household gods. But that's actually interesting. I should look into that. I assume they get like I said, get handed down to the male heir. But I should check in on that. Dante's heirs, male heirs. Interesting. Okay, and then we talked. No, I guess we didn't talk about this, but syncretism is this concept where gods of various cultures and parts of the world could all be kind of included in one religion. So anywhere that Rome ended up in all of Eurasia, they would come across other people's gods, and they would say, "Oh, like you call this guy Zeus? Yeah, we have him too in our religion. We just call him Jupiter." And that's what syncretism is, where they would encounter other gods and say, "Oh no, that's not another god. That's just like we have that god. We call him something different though." And that this would happen all the time. And then if they came across a god that they didn't think that they had already included in their religion and just called by their own name, they would summon forth this god from that culture or people and take it back to Rome with them, especially if they had conquered those people. So, for example, Carthage, which was this big rival of Rome early on when Rome was trying to become this dominant power in the Mediterranean, they have this goddess in Carthage, apparently, that they called Uni. And Rome was like, we're going to bring her back to Rome. We're going to call her Juno Regina. And that will be a god that was, let's see. I mean, they probably already had a Juno before the transfer of Juno Regina from Veti. So they already would have had a Juno. But that's another weird thing. They have gods. They have different versions of gods. So they have like Mars Ultor, Mars the Avenger, and then they just have like regular Mars. So they have different like versions of a lot of their gods. And so in this case, they would have gotten Juno Regina, Juno the Queen, from the Carthaginians, and they would have brought her back to Rome. They would have built her a temple, and they would have said, "Hey, we got a new version of Juno in our religion now, or like in our city, who has their own temple." They had a conception of the afterlife, which is somewhat similar to Judeo-Christian conceptions of the afterlife. Remember, all this pagan, what we call now pagan worship, would have given way to Christianity by the end of the 3rd century, around this time when Rome's capital changes under Constantine. But if Rome starts around 700 BCE, that is about 1,000 years of them worshiping all of these pagan gods like Jupiter, Venus, Mars, etc. We have some interesting birth rights. Okay, a family would actually choose to accept a baby into their family. And if they didn't want to do that, they would expose the child. Does anybody know what expose means, Jaden?
Throw it outside in the forest and let the dog eat them?
Yeah, you just kind of like at best case scenario, you'd put it like in a little basket or something and just leave it on the outskirts of the city to either be raised by wolves, to just kind of, who knows, or maybe like a farmer or like a goat herd would find it and raise it. So in Roman comedies, there's this common plot line of like a kid being exposed when they were young, and then eventually they somehow do grow up, which wouldn't always happen to these children, and they are able to find their birth family sometimes, and hijinks ensue usually. Genevieve?
I feel like they're told like, oh, if you, I put my child out, and he did fine, and he turned into his son, super. I feel like I'd be like, oh, I want my kid to do that too, so I'm gonna do that too.
Yeah, you mean because Romulus and Remus were exposed children who were separated from their birth family and they were raised by the wolf. So you're saying like families would think like, well, if it worked out for Romulus and Remus, we should do it to our kids. Yeah, maybe. I guess it'd really toughen a person up if they even survived,
I
But
wonder what religion or what city in general started this. It was probably Sparta. To be honest.
it does sound kind of Spartan, but I was just gonna say this goes if you know Oedipus at all, you probably don't, maybe. But the Greek guy Oedipus, he was the child of a king, but the king got a bad prophecy about his kid like overtaking him or killing him, and so he exposed Oedipus, and it leads to all kinds of craziness where Oedipus does in fact eventually kill his dad and marry his mom on accident. But anyway, and there's this weird thing, this bullet point right here, 3 men dressed as gods would sweep the front door, knock the door with a pestle and an axe and a broom, and this symbolized the various like facets of society. And it was just part of the ritual of welcoming a child into like Roman civic life. And then if it was a girl, they would set a table to Juno. If it was a boy, they'd set a table to Hercules. This happens in various Roman ceremonies and festivals where they set a table and like give food to the gods. And I always wonder, like the next day, they just like come back and like clean up that table, and it's just like, yep, the food was just sitting there. But of course, this is kind of like it's working on a metaphorical level. They really did think that certain Roman statues of gods like were kind of the god. It wasn't just a representation; it like was essentially the god. But I don't know how they explained like they would set tables for these gods, and like Saturn during Saturnalia, they would make a feast for him and put it in front of his statue. But it's like, so I mean, he's not
What do
eating
you
it.
do with
He's not eating any of the food, and then there's just like flies buzzing around the food the next day or something. Who knows? I don't know how that ends. Jenna?
I think dogs and other people would eat it.
Yeah. I'm sure. Hopefully, they would disperse it and it wouldn't just go to waste. Like once the symbolic idea of the god having the food served to them, once they carried that out, maybe they could just like, okay, now let's actually eat the food because like the statue's clearly not going to eat it. Genevieve?
But rot will eat it. So
Who?
rot.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's true. Like if you just let it sit there for long enough, it would eventually kind of just like the parts of it that didn't like get moldy would kind of just like disappear. Like insects would get to it, and maybe for them they were like that is the god eating it or something. I don't really know. These marriage ceremonies aren't super interesting or really unique, honestly. Funeral rites are kind of interesting. There would be processions through the streets, at least for people of means. If there was even a little bit of money in the family, they would have a procession for a person who died. They would be carried around in a Greek sarcophagus, which apparently means death eater. And burial and cremation were both practiced. Cremation is a more kind of ancient method. It's more hygienic in a way. And it goes back to like in Iliad, the Trojan War. A lot of their people are cremated when they die. But that kind of fell out of favor eventually for burial, and so we'd have cemeteries on the outskirts of the city along the roads. And if somebody like wasn't well known or didn't have a big family, a benefactor might hire people to join the procession and like be really dramatic and like cry through the streets and like be really kind of histrionic and over the top with their mourning. And so it was like this sad thing, but the procession aspect actually reminds me of in New Orleans, they have these second lines, which is what it's called when you have a jazz ensemble play like jazz music through the streets around the block of where a funeral is happening. And it's more of a celebration. So this is kind of simultaneously a celebration, but it's also, there is mourning. People would be very kind of like dramatic with their mourning in ancient times. And for really important people, they would even sometimes have funeral games. Again, something that goes back to Homeric times, where you'd have like wrestling tournaments to celebrate somebody's life, which is not something that we think of as like a normal way to celebrate someone's life when they die. Correct? Yep. Genevieve?
First, isn't cremation kind of more space effective and like hygienic? And also like do it in the blood. Also, the guy has like put no effort into
This guy?
No, for the marriage.
Oh. No, yeah. The toga's not as. This is some kind of ceremony of stola. Stola is what women would wear, or both men and women could wear tunics or tunica. But the toga was actually really elaborate. You'd usually have like the servants who lived in your house like put it on for you. The dude would just kind of stand there, and they would do this like very intricate like layering of the toga around the person. But not as nice as a stola. Cremation is definitely more hygienic for sure, and so it's weird that it would have fallen out of favor. Because I guess maybe they had enough space where they had the room for the cemeteries to bury people, and it wasn't gonna end up in the water supply or whatever else, because they did have these aqueducts. Yeah, aqueducts. But
Like in the
did they not cremate in the bubonic plagues? I don't actually know.
they did. Like, piled them in the
Right.
and, like, buried them sometimes.
Right, we have those images of like the wheelbarrows and like the bring out your dead people like walking down the street. Yeah, just for reference, bubonic plague, that's happening around the, what is it, 13th century, I want to say. I might be off by 100 years or so. But that's happening at the end of the Dark Ages. The medieval European Dark Ages don't start happening until about the 5th, 6th century. So that's at the end of the Western Roman Empire, after the Western Roman Empire has fallen, Jenna. And then we have this dark period, or that's what we call it. We call it the Dark Ages, which is a misnomer. It's not really a good label for that period of time. But that's when we get things like knights and like castles that we think of in Western Europe. And at the end of that is the bubonic plague. And then 100 or 200 years after the bubonic plague, we eventually start to have this Enlightenment period, this Renaissance. Jaden?
I remember when we were doing Greek mythology and history and stuff.
Yeah.
And it was the Punic Wars, and they were having a plague like in the middle of a giant battle, and there was just bodies piled everywhere. It was raining constantly.
I wonder if people would have figured out an early form of biological warfare during times like that, where, like if a body like was exposed to people, like it could like spread disease. Really grim stuff, really grisly stuff. Yes, Jenna.
I got a question.
What
What the heck did it do with the bodies?
What do you mean during the plague? Are we still talking about the plague?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not
They would
a.
either burn them or they would do a mass burial.
I'm not sure. I don't teach the Dark Ages Europe. I teach ancient Roman history. But I mean, I think they would bury as many as they could. It's just, they have those the catacombs under like France.
Yeah.
So I think if they had like tunnels, they would just like leave bodies down there. So it was like kind of a burial, but it's like a big open burial. That's just like in a cave. I don't know though. We should get back to Rome. Genevieve?
Not on the go. But like apparently people would try to strap bombs to capture dogs like during the war, and then try to put them to other people's and then go back to the oldest thing. Oh my god.
That's a huge bummer. Okay, temples in Rome. This is a list of temples in Rome. So there's a lot of them. These were centers for religious practices, especially during festivals. Like I said, the Roman calendar was chock full of these festivals. So you'd go to certain temples during certain times of the year because like that festival would have been all about Mars, or it would have been about Janus, the god of doors and entryways, or it would have been Juno or whoever it is. And I put Roman by the ones that are distinctly Roman, as in they are not a god that is originally coming from Greek mythology or religion, is how they would have thought of it. Because again, most of them are coming from older Greek traditions. But they have some distinctly Roman ones, like Janus, who is this two-headed guy. I don't have a picture of him here, but he is the namesake of the month of January. He's just a two-headed god. It's like his thing. And so he would be celebrated at the beginning of the year, just like Saturn was celebrated at the end of the year. Romans actually liked Saturn, whereas Greeks didn't care about Cronus, right? That's the Greek version of Saturn. So certain gods were kind of distinct to Rome, whereas most of them were just renamed Greek gods. Aiden? Yeah. Gods of doors. They have gods of like every little tiny thing. And so these are like most of the gods who had temples were like more major gods. But then you have gods that we never talk about, like Bellona or Bona Dea. Some of we have like tons of agriculture gods and goddesses that like no one remembers nowadays. Also, there were like local gods. If you went to smaller villages in the Italian peninsula, each little village would be like, oh yeah, like our god is this guy. And these are usually gods that like we don't talk about now. We talk about the gods who are part of like the major pantheon of Greek gods, the ones that we name our planets after. Like those are the ones that we still care about. But there were way more than just that, and so it get very niche and very like specific. Jaden?
I still don't understand why they consider Caesar a god, but.
Well, yeah, so I mean, we'll talk about that, but some of these are actually dudes, like Augustus, and there's one for Julius Caesar. And this was something that they didn't do until Julius Caesar died. They did not deify men or humans until Julius Caesar and Augustus, and then after that, it became a thing. But previously, that had been something that maybe was more common in Egypt, right? Cleopatra was literally supposed to be the reincarnation of Isis, or maybe it would have been something that happened in what they call Asia Minor, but it was not a Roman thing until it suddenly was after Julius Caesar was assassinated. And then Augustus would get deified, and basically every emperor after that, unless they were just a really, really bad emperor, would get deified to some extent. Some of them during their lifetime. People like Caligula and Nero would like act like they were gods while they were alive. So that was taking it to a next level. Genevieve?
Did they ever like beat the gods more than
Feed?
yeah?
Maybe. I mean, the big instance that I know of that is during Saturnalia when they set a table for Saturn. I don't know if they did that for every single god, but it would probably happen around certain festivals. Yeah.
Would you do it for every festival, or would they just be like, okay, you can eat like once a year?
Once.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. For Saturnalia, for instance, they would take bandages off of Saturn's feet, like the statue of Saturn that they had. They would take bandages off his feet that had been on his feet all year long, because that was supposed to, like, in his kind of mythology, the way they thought of him, that was his time when he got to be free during the winter solstice, and that they all got to celebrate too, because they were opening the doors of where they had been storing a lot of the grain for that fall harvest, and they were just having this party along with Saturn. And so, yeah, he only eats once a year. He only gets unbound once a year. I think in their minds that would have been enough for a god who is essentially just made of marble anyway.
So
Abby?
if they didn't feed him like once a year, would he like die or something?
Well, no, but I mean, they would probably think of him as being mad at them or something. Again, they do things for these gods because they literally think that the gods will show them favor for having done it. It's very superstitious, but there's logic to it. They're not doing these animal sacrifices just for no reason. They think if they sacrifice to Mars, Mars is going to help them in their military campaigns. Like, it's just like it's a trade-off. And so they would do things and they would not forget to do things because it was like important to them. And I mean, yeah, early religion is all about kind of superstition and an exchange, to be reductive. Not for every culture, but for Romans it was. But no, they wouldn't have forgotten until Christianity became the state religion, and then I guess so when that happens, when Christianity does become the state religion in the 3rd century, all of these Roman temples become churches, and they get kind of like they kind of transition into being churches within a Judeo-Christian viewpoint. This is the temple of Eupater Optimus Maximus, Jupiter the greatest and the best. That's what it would have looked like. That's a model of it. And we have the Pantheon here, which I should have gotten a picture of the interior of. It's that really cool dome in the interior. Some temples are still standing in pretty decent shape, but many are reduced to like just their columns or just parts of the architecture, just kind of bare bones stuff. Landon?
So isn't in the temple, isn't that one the one that has all the windows at the top and
Yeah.
has a whole bunch of all like the stained glass?
Yeah, we've seen that
We've
in
already
art.
seen it.
Oh, y'all
We
seen
saw
that?
it in art last year.
All right, cool. Yeah, okay. That's good. Yeah, Pantheon is, I mean, you can still go to the Pantheon. It's like one of the most impressive pieces of architecture in Rome.
Do we have any pictures of like ancient bathhouses?
We do. We're about to get to it. Let's kind of skip through a little bit. We got mystery cults. Okay, these are secret religious groups that would go back to ancient Greece, and they were devoted to certain gods, and you would be initiated into them and get like secret information that only members had. So that's not something that like every Roman would have been involved with, but certain Romans would have tried to get initiated into these mystery cults. Yeah. So, and sometimes it'd be like you would receive information about the afterlife or how to have a good afterlife and stuff like that. But this is more niche. This is more of a niche part of their religion where your common everyman Roman person wouldn't probably be in a mystery cult. Mysteria from the Greek word secret, and cultus from like cultivated. So it's like these cultivated secrets and like groups of worshipers for specific gods like Orpheus or Isis or Mithra. Some gods we don't really talk about anymore, like Mithra. And they would not be unique to a certain place, but they would kind of be all over the Mediterranean. There would be like chapters basically of a certain cult. Jaden?
So would ISIS, the modern day cult, like
No, it didn't have to do with the goddess.
reincarnation of the non-modern day cult?
Nothing to do with the Egyptian goddess Isis. No, sometimes Isis is related to the Greek woman Io, mythological figure Io. There was a weird period of time for a century or so where pagan worship was starting to fade and Christianity was becoming a thing. So here you can see this is there's like on this plaque here there's Christian symbolism alongside pagan indicators, And so pagus just means small village. So when you call someone a pagan, we're talking about people who were outside of the big cities like Rome, who had not been kind of converted to Christianity yet, because they were like hillbillies, basically. They were like out in the wilderness. All right, we'll pick up on this maybe like next week, I guess. All right.